Tractate Pesachim predominantly discusses the laws of Passover. Passover, or Pesach, celebrates the Jewish people's exodus from Egypt as told in the Torah. One of the main obligations on this holiday is to not eat or even own any Chametz, or leavened bread, in your house or ownership across this entire holiday. Practically, this means that just about any food that contain grain, so bread, pastry, any baked goods really, and to a certain extent many other foods too that could contain trace amounts of chametz, cannot be owned on Passover and must be destroyed, or as is more commonly done, sold just before the holiday. Instead of bread, we eat matzah, which is a flat, round, cracker-like food which is made in under 18 minutes and not given time to rise, to commemorate how the Jewish people left Egypt in such a rush that their bread didn't have time to rise. There are further laws of Passover, the Paschal offering that occurred during the times of the temple, and the actual Passover ceremony nowadays, the Seder as it's called, and how that's run, and its obligations, which are also going to be discussed later on. Chapter 1 largely deals with the laws of Chametz, leavened bread, and the laws of searching your property before Passover starts to ensure that you don't have any remaining pieces anywhere in your house. The first Mishnah says, by the light, or as it's called, of the 14th of the Hebrew month of Nisan, you search your home for Chametz, leavened bread, by candlelight. You don't need to search places you wouldn't typically take bread. If you're searching through your barrels in a cellar, it said you need to search 2 rows. Beis Shammai says this means the 2 rows across the cellar. Beis Hillel says this means just the 2 external upper rows. The Gemara has a lengthy debate between many opinions as to what exactly or light means. Does it refer to the morning of the 14th or the evening? So we bring a number of different verses which use the word light in such a context to determine if it's referring to morning or evening. It says, as soon as the morning was light, the men were sent on their way. Light here seems to mean morning. So we say no, this here usage of the word light is a verb, meaning the morning lightened, not that it literally means morning here. It also says you should generally travel to a city with the light. Next verse, it says, and as the light of the morning when the sun rises. Light means morning? No, that refers to that, like the brightness of the morning light, so will be the rising of the sun for the righteous by the world to come, which is a later concept. Okay, what about the verse, and God called the light day? Does that mean light means morning? No, that's explained to mean that God literally called the light to perform the mitzvah of the day, and he did the same by the darkness and night. Well, it says, praise him, all the stars of light. This would imply that light means night. No, it means literally the light of stars, which are legally considered to be light, and that has relevancy by vows. So if you vow to abstain from benefiting from light, you can't even use starlight. Another verse, it says, a murderer arises with the light to kill the poor and needy, and in the night he is a thief. So the last part of the verse said night, meaning the first part, where it said light, must refer to morning. So we say no, it just means that only if it's as clear to you as light that the person is trying to kill you, you're allowed to defend yourself by killing him within the context. Another verse is, let the stars of the twilight be dark, let it look for light but have none, neither let it see the eyelids of the morning. So there again, it refers to literally light. We bring some more verses which are similarly inconclusive and try to prove it further from other sources where it discusses the word light. In the end, we bring it from a source which speaks about timings on offering sacrifices, and another which mentions we say certain prayers by Yom Kippur at or by light, and by a different source which straight up just says that by the evening of the 14th of Nisan, we search for bread by candlelight. So we prove pretty unequivocally that light here means evening, which is when we search for the chametz by candlelight. Some places they refer to night as night, other places they use the euphemism of light to refer to the evening, as we see from sources in the Torah to always speak in a polite and proper manner. There are several instances of this given. Sometimes, if it'd take too many words, the Torah will speak in a concise language instead. There are instances given in regards to the importance of proper polite speech and how it reflects good and admirable character. One of the examples given was of a Kohen who spoke improperly that his portion of food was the size of a lizard's tail. So, possibly due to this arrogance, possibly due to the fact that he cast aspirations on himself, they investigated his lineage and found out he wasn't actually a Kohen. There's a related incident mentioned. Once a non-Jewish individual decided to go to the temple by Passover, pretend he was Jewish, and eat of the Paschal sacrifice. So he was bragging that he'd done this and eaten of the finest portion of the Paschal offering. So the sage Rabbi Yehuda ben Beseira told him that he hadn't even eaten of the best part of the Paschal offering, as he hadn't eaten any of the fat tail. and he advised him to ask for some of that portion the next time he went, which the guy did, and that's not a part given for people to eat. So they invested the guy, found out he had been tricking them and stealing from the Paschal offering, so they sentenced him to capital punishment and thanked Rabbi Yehuda ben Bezeira. There are other similar examples listed of how to properly speak and be polite. There are more of these, and it also says how you can tell things about a person, like what tribe he's descended from, based on the way he speaks. Back to searching for Chametz, it says we do it by evening. The particularities are discussed. We do it by evening, as that's when everybody's at home, and that's when the candle will actually help. Some say you shouldn't start studying Torah just before this time, in case you get too focused and forget to search for Chametz. Also, it says that a person renting a house is obligated to search the house he's renting, as long as you receive the keys before the 14th of Nisan. If the owner isn't there to ask if it was already searched on the 14th, everyone is considered trustworthy by this, and we presume that they already searched their house. This is discussed, and others actually disagree, saying we don't make such a presumption, but we would believe women, servants, or minors if they said they did it, as this is a rabbinic law. In the event that somebody rents a house for Passover and there's a presumption that it was searched, and he discovers that it actually wasn't, it's not considered to be a mistaken transaction, as it's not considered a not good thing to need to do a mitzvah yourself. Anyways, some say you can eat leaven during the first 5 hours of the 14th, and you burn all your remaining chametz at the 6th hour. Others say that you can eat until the 4th hour, do nothing with it at the 5th, and then burn it by the 6th hour. Everyone agrees chametz is prohibited from the 6th hour of the 14th day and onward, based on some verses. The verses are discussed. It says on the 14th day of the month. It's explained that the first here refers to the day before the holiday, based on a number of similar sources, which are listed and discussed. We also bring other sources that we destroy the chametz before midday, before the holiday actually starts. The verse says, "You shall not slaughter my blood offering while in the possession of chametz." This means that you can't bring the Paschal offering while you still own chametz, so before the holiday starts, by midday, which is discussed. We bring some similar proofs. We also explain the verses that you cannot keep chametz, even if it's hidden, so you can't see it, and you can't hold on to a non-Jewish person's chametz over Passover, even though you don't own it. The verse also says that the chametz shall not be kept to you in all your borders, to exclude keeping your chametz in pits, ditches, or vaults. This is further explained, and it says that you only can't hold on to a non-Jewish person's chametz over Passover if you're responsible for it. An example is given of soldiers who deposited their flour with Jewish residents of a city, so they were responsible, so they couldn't have it in their house or ownership over Passover. There is some related discussions in regards to non-Jewish people's property being held by a Jew, in regards to taxes and similar, and further qualifications by such chametz. If you find chametz in your house on the holiday of Passover, you should put a vessel over it so you don't mistakenly come to eat it. This doesn't apply if it's consecrated food to the temple, as you wouldn't eat that all year long anyways. If a non-Jewish person's chametz is kept in your house over Passover, you should make a partition around it 10 handbreadths high as a reminder so you don't eat it. Again, this doesn't apply if it's consecrated food. If you travel a distance by sea or with a caravan 30 days before Passover, you don't need to get rid of your chametz. Some people say that the only time that you need to get rid of your chametz when you're traveling within 30 days is if you're planning on returning during Passover. In addition, based on other verses, it says that we should teach about the laws of Passover 2 weeks before Passover itself. Back to searching for chametz. Right after you finish searching, you need to nullify your ownership on all of the chametz you own, in case you find additional food that you might hesitate to destroy, that you can't nullify, as it was found after the 6th hour, so it's not legally in your possession, but it's treated as if it is, so you need to nullify it. We don't push off this nullification so as to prevent negligence. We don't nullify it at the beginning of the 6th hour, as you're rabbinically not allowed to have any at that point, so it's not considered to be in your possession, so you wouldn't be able to nullify it. This is discussed a bit further. In the event that you find bread on Passover, but it's so spoiled that you can't tell if it's matzah, which is allowed, or chametz, which is not, if the box it was found in was used majority for matzah, it's permitted. We bring sources, along with similar assumptions, about coins found on the Temple Mount. If they're found during the pilgrimage festival, they're assumed to be Maaser Sheni tithes, as the marketplaces of Jerusalem were swept every day, so it had to have fallen recently. The case of the matzah in the box could be where it's matzah, and it spoiled fully very quickly over the past few days of Passover, as fresh warm matzah were piled on top of it in the box, causing it to spoil quickly. There are other points on Maaser Sheni coins, and it lists the blessings said on searching for chametz, which are disputed, but it's decided that we say these. It also goes over the phrasing of some other blessings, which generally blessings are said before doing any mitzvah, besides for immersing in a mikvah as you're impure beforehand. The next point was that we search for chametz by the light of a candle. We give a source for this. We don't use the sun, moon, torch, or otherwise, only a candle. You don't need to search a courtyard, as birds would eat the chametz. Pavilion and skylight, you can use its sunlight to search, but the sides of the room by a skylight, you can't use the sunlight. You'd need a candle. A candle is better than a torch, as a torch can't search in cracks and holes. Torchlight falls behind you, unlike a candle. A torch could make you afraid, as it's dangerous, and also torchlight flickers. There are a number of miscellaneous places that says you don't have to search, such as very high or low holes in your walls, chicken coops, straw storehouses, and otherwise. This is argued over. It says by a wine storehouse you don't need to search unless you'd go down there during your meals throughout the year to get yourself more wine. This isn't done with an oil storehouse, as people have set amounts of oils used for eating and wouldn't get more during the meal. Some say you don't need to search a large fish pantry. Some other miscellaneous places that you don't have to search: salt, wax, wood, and date storehouses. Some don't obligate you to stick your hand into a hole in the wall, such as one that collapsed, that a scorpion could be lurking within. Some suggest that the reason there's a concern of danger, even though there's the tradition that a person will not be harmed while going to do a mitzvah, is that it might be that during your search for chametz, you might stop the mitzvah to look for a lost needle or something after you're done. There are other suggested dangers, like if you're sticking your hand through the wall in the middle of the night, a non-Jewish neighbor might get concerned you're trying to do witchcraft or something. Also, the point on no harm coming to you when you're doing a mitzvah, that wouldn't apply when the cause of harm is likely based on a verse. There are related points brought about traveling to and from school at night without concern for danger as you're going to do a mitzvah. It also has some points on the traveling for the pilgrimage to Jerusalem. Anyways, we said an argument as to how many layers of wine barrels you need to search. Based on I said 2 rows. Some take this to mean the first 2 vertical layers, others say the outer layer in an L shape. There are sources for both interpretations. The other opinion was Beis Hillel, who said the upper outer rows. Some say this means the top 2 layers of the first vertical row, others say it's 2 layers deep of the top layer. The sources for this are debated. New Mishnah. We don't worry that a weasel, for instance, dragged chametz from house to house or around within a house, as otherwise you need to check literally everywhere at the same time and it'd be impossible. The Gemara says you would need to check if you actually saw a weasel. Also, you can assume the weasel ate the whole thing if it's meat, but you have to assume there's leftovers by bread, hence this issue. This is further discussed. There's also some related discussion regarding a concern about a weasel dragging away a fetus. It also says that any chametz left over after searching on the 14th should be put in a secure place to prevent these weasel issues. Sources are brought along with some related discussions regarding animals taken from piles of food, either matzah or chametz, where we're not sure which pile the animal took from and brought into a house. If it was from one of the piles, we're strict and require a new search. If it's from a piece away from the piles, you collect the majority of the piles, so if majority are matzah, you don't need to research. There are similar related cases discussed about animals grabbing food from certain piles or areas. Also, if you put down 9 pieces of chametz and find 10, there's debate if we assume that's the only extra piece, or if we have to search for more. The same argument applies by the inverse. If you put down 10 and find 9, some say you have to look for 1 more. Others say you have to keep looking for another 10, as in the original 10. There's also debate if you left chametz in one corner and then find it in another corner. There are further discussions about animals bringing in food and the requisite requirements to search after, along with some unique cases of placement of chametz, like on a beam and similar, which all go unresolved. New Mishnah. Rabbi Yehuda says that we search for chametz on the night of the 14th of the month of Nisan, and on the morning of the 14th, by the time of the disposal of the chametz, we search again. The rabbis say that if you didn't search by night, you should search by day. If you didn't search by day, by the disposal of the chametz at the 6th hour. If you didn't search then, you should search until dark. Any chametz found after searching should be put in a secure place so it doesn't get lost again. The Gemara qualifies these opinions that they both only require 1 search. They both mean that if you forget the first one by the night, you should do it by the later periods. The disagreement is if you should still search after the prohibition against chametz goes into effect. There's similar debate in regards to grain by the Omer offering. There's further discussion on these topics. It also compares the topic of chametz on Passover being confused with bread with a few other concepts by Shabbos and otherwise. New Mishnah. Rabbi Meir says we can eat chametz in the 5th hour and burn the remaining chametz in the beginning of the 6th hour. Rabbi Yehuda says we can eat it in the 4th hour, leave it in the 5th, and burn it by the 6th. The way people were informed of these times by the temple was that 2 leavened loaves of bread of a Thanksgiving offering were put out on a bench by the temple mount. If they were there, people knew that they could still eat chametz. If one was removed, people would stop eating. If both were removed, people knew to start burning their chametz. Rabbi Gamliel holds that non-sacred chametz can be eaten during the 4th hour. Chametz, that is, teruma, can be eaten by the 5th, and everything must be burnt by the 6th hour. The Gemara discusses the topic of the window for error of a witness testifying the time of something's occurrence. There are a few opinions as to how many hours this is and how much wiggle room we give to a testimony as to how accurate they need to be. So some people say that people don't error by these calculations. So why do they need to burn their chametz at the beginning of the 6th hour? They should be able to wait until the end. Some say people error half an hour, so they should be able to eat until the middle of the 6th hour, and according to one who says that people error an hour and a bit, they should be able to eat chametz until the end of the 5th hour. So we answer that there's a difference. Testimony is given by conscientious people who are careful by such things, but Chametz and its laws apply to everybody, so we're stricter with our times there. There's similar further discussion in regards to these calculations, along with some points as to when the proper times for meals are, like the 1st hour is the time for the meal of the Ludim, a cannibalistic tribe. The 2nd hour is the meal for thieves, the 3rd is for the wealthy, the 4th is for the workers, the 5th is for Torah scholars, and the 6th is for everybody, which is discussed. It also speaks on the points on testimony for a bit longer. It also argues over exactly who we hold like. There are proofs brought both ways, but we seem to hold like Rabbi Yehuda that you can eat by the 4th hour, not by the 5th, and then you burn it by the 6th. It also further goes through how the symbolic loaves by the temple were done. The remaining points are discussed further. Okay. There's a very lengthy discussion that'll digress from the laws of Passover for the next few pages in regards to points on the laws of impurity, called the portion of Rabbi Hanina Sagan HaKoyanim. As some background, as has been mentioned very frequently throughout, impurity, or toma, is the idea of a physically indiscernible ritual impurity that can affect people, food, or objects, and stems from dead animals or people, or from live people who experience certain bodily irregularities. Impurity can be transferred between objects, although it gets weaker across transmissions. There are particularities as to from what and how something can contract this impurity. Things can be purified from impurity, generally by immersing them in a mikvah, a particular pool of water with specific laws. The practical relevance of these laws was by the temple. Someone impure wasn't permitted to enter the temple, and it has application by certain tithes and offerings. So it's largely not too practically relevant nowadays, with some exceptions. The Mishnah says when the temple stood, they would always burn the meat offerings that had been contaminated with impurity, along with meat that had been contaminated with a main central source of impurity, called an Av HaTumah, a father of impurity, even though that technically increased the other pieces' impurity level. They would also light using impure oil onto a lamp that had a greater form of impurity from contact with a corpse, even though that again increased the impurity level. Some say that you could burn pure and impure chametz from teruma by Passover together. Others say they should be burned separately, but they argue if you should separate impure and questionably impure teruma chametz when burning. The Gemara further qualifies these laws. It discusses some additional points on these levels of contamination. This is further discussed. It also discusses points on burning together other invalid sacrificial parts, whether or not that's allowed. Some say this argument by chametz, burning of pure and impure, that only applies by the 6th hour. By the 7th hour, everyone will agree that you can burn them together. Sources are argued over as to whether or not this is a valid interpretation. One of the opinions, Rabbi Eliezer, holds that biblically, drinks can acquire a status of impurity, but they cannot pass it on to other things. This is argued on as to whether this is a valid opinion, citing a few sources. Others say that drinks can't even become impure biblically, which is another argument, which we bring sources for. This is discussed further, bringing even more sources. These sources are even further debated, trying to figure out exactly what we hold between these two opinions in regards to the susceptibility of drinks in regards to the laws of impurity. Some even want to argue a distinction that this is about drinks in the temple. Drinks everywhere else are not susceptible to impurity. Others disagree. This is argued further. We bring even more proofs, discussion on laws of purity by beverages in regards to contact with utensils and similar. This is argued even further. In the end, there's like 7 different opinions as to the susceptibility of impurity by food and drink, which I'll just put up here. It's a pretty complicated portion. By the way, all of these laws are in regards to the biblical law of these susceptibilities. Rabbinically, everybody holds that food and drink can contaminate food and drink, although only drinks can contaminate utensils. There are also some related concepts by these laws discussed, such as that a needle found stuck in the flesh of an offering is presumed to be impure, as is the animal, and similar points. This is discussed further. If the needle was found in the animal's feces, everything is presumed to be pure, which is further qualified. There are other laws by impurity mentioned, such as a theoretical chain of transmission from a sheretz, a dead creature of certain sorts, to utensils, to foods, to beverages, etc. Okay, back to disposing teruma chametz with burning pure with impure. There are further attempted sources brought to try to prove if this is allowed from a number of different discussions. It also says that if teruma becomes impure, you have to make certain it's not used incorrectly based on these discussions. Some allow salvaging a revi'is, an old form of measurement of teruma, by capturing it in a pure vessel, even if its interior is pure, but its exterior is not, in spite of the concern that the exterior could touch the teruma while you're holding it, thus contaminating it. In spite of this, you should still attempt to save teruma in such a vessel. And that's the end of Chapter 1. Chapter 2 of Tractate Pesachim continues going through the laws against eating, owning, or benefiting from Chametz, leavened bread, on the holiday of Passover. The Mishnah says, as long as you're allowed to eat Chametz, you can feed it to animals, domesticated or undomesticated, to birds, or sell it to a non-Jewish person, and you can benefit off of it. After the time passes that you can't have any, you can't benefit from chametz, and you can't fire an oven or stove with it. Some say you have to dispose of your chametz by burning it. Others say you can crumble it, or scatter it, or toss it into the ocean. The Gemara debates based on this who the implication is to who we hold like in regards to the timings of stopping eating and burning our chametz. We say it seems to reflect the third opinion of Rabban Gamliel, that unconsecrated chametz can be eaten in the 4th hour, consecrated chametz can be eaten in the 5th, and everything else is burnt in the 6th. And the Mishnah is saying that as long as a Kohen is still allowed to eat teruma during the 5th hour, non-Kohanim can feed unconsecrated chametz to animals or birds, but can't eat it themselves. It needed to mention domesticated and undomesticated animals and birds to include if the animals leave their food after, and if they hide it after, and then it just mentioned birds because they said the other two. We said you can sell your chametz to a non-Jewish person, unlike other opinions who disagree and say you can only do so if they'll eat it before Passover starts. Some say that if you burn your chametz, you can benefit from it after the deadline, and it's no longer considered chametz. There are further points, and according to the opinion that holds that you have to burn chametz, you can't benefit from it while it's burning. It also lists some verses as sources from all of this, and some related points. The sources are discussed and how they relate to other forbidden foods and meats. These points are spoken on further. It also discusses points on the permissibility of deriving benefit from various other forbidden substances. This is discussed further, and it brings other sources for the impermissibility to benefit from chametz on Passover and other similar concepts. These verses as sources are brought and discussed. This is brought further. It also mentions an opinion on a general rule that you're only liable for punishment by the time of the temple in regards to violating a prohibition in regards to eating food if you ate the food in a normal manner of consumption. Examples are given and it's discussed. There are other points on food you can't derive benefit from, things like meat cooked in milk and similar. It also says some related things that you can't generally benefit from. You can't be healed from the wood of the Asherah tree, which was used for some idolatrous practices back then, even if it's a life-threatening danger, as based on the source, you're meant to give up your life rather than serve an idol. In addition to having to give up your life to not serve an idol, the other two things, based on sources, that you'd need to give up your life rather than do are engaging in illicit relations and murdering an innocent man. So you need to let yourself die rather than kill another individual, save for if somebody is trying to kill or sexually assault you or somebody else. There are related points on forbidden medicinal benefits from foods which you can't use. This and further laws are discussed further. Related to the earlier point on not being allowed to fire an oven with chametz, it lists some other forbidden things that you can't fire your oven with, like the peels of orla, which are under 3-year-old grown fruits, or straw from forbidden plant mixtures in a vineyard. If it's a new oven, it must be shattered. If it was old, it must cool before its next use. There's argument as to who holds like these statements. There are further related points discussed. There's also discussion if you can fire an oven with consecrated wood. Some opinions say no, which is debated in relation to the other statements. It also discusses the method of disposal of chametz, which we said, according to one opinion, was burning, and how that relates to other types of food, if they're disposed of in a similar manner. It also discusses the other opinion that you can crumble it up and throw it into the wind and toss it into the sea. There's debate if you could do either or the requirement is to both crumble it and toss it into the sea, and if an idol needs to be destroyed in a similar manner. Sources seem to imply that both are required, and an idol can be tossed specifically into the Red Sea, which is not navigable, without first crushing it. Some say you only need to grind it first by the disposal of wheat kernels, which won't dissolve unless crumbled, but by bread, which dissolves in water, some say you can just toss it straight in. New Mishnah, chametz that a non-Jewish person owned over Passover, you can benefit from it after Passover. If the chametz was owned by a Jewish person over Passover, you can't benefit from it after, as the verse says, leaven shall not be seen by you. The Gemara disputes whose opinion this holds like. It also brings the verses which teach these laws. As for which opinions hold like these laws, it's further argued. It also gets into a discussion on chametz mixed with other foods, saying the mixture is forbidden on Passover no matter what it's mixed with, and it can't be nullified. If there's chametz left over Passover, it can be nullified by being mixed with permitted food of a different kind than itself, as long as the concentration of chametz is too small to impart any flavor. This is further discussed and how this principle applies generally by mixtures of forbidden food. We hold that chametz mixed with food on Passover is not allowed with any mixture, and chametz after Passover mixed with food is allowed, whether it was mixed with similar kinds of food or not. It also discusses earthenware pots used for chametz, saying that they contain chametz flavors and must be broken before Passover starts to prevent any cooking-related issues with these pots. Others say that you don't need to break them, you can just store them away until after Passover and then continue using them. There are some related cases by absorption by an oven. This is discussed further. In regards to knives, some say you should have a special designated set of knives for Passover that didn't absorb chametz, or at least purge and fully clean them to make them like a new set by wrapping the haft in clay, placing the blade in fire, removing the clay, and immersing the haft in boiling water. We say the haft and blade should be purged in boiling water in the primary vessel, in the vessel in which the water was actually boiled. It also says you can purge clean a wooden mixing spoon in boiling water in a primary vessel, as it expels flavor in the same way it absorbs. By glazed vessels, earthenware with a lead coating, it says that the green coating, meaning with a high alum content, is highly absorbent, so it can't be used on Passover. Other colors, black and white ones, also can't be used at all, whether they have cracks or not, as they're used for hot things, so they absorb more, unlike by forbidden wines. It says that vessels used for chametz while cold can be used on Passover, besides for sourdough or sharp condiment holders, as they have intense fermentation and will be more absorbed, and there are similar dishes listed. New Mishnah: if a non-Jewish person lent a Jewish person money before Passover and chametz was used as collateral, the chametz can be used for his benefit after Passover. If a Jewish person lent a non-Jewish person money before Passover with chametz as collateral, he cannot benefit from the chametz after Passover. The Gemara has a debate. If somebody had a mortgage on somebody's property and they fail to pay their debt, if the property is then collected retroactively or from that point on. This has practical ramifications if the lender consecrated or sold the property before the borrower failed to pay the loan. If it was retroactively his, then it was his when he sold it, so it works. If it's only his from then on, then that wasn't a valid sale. These opinions are debated from similarly related cases. It also discusses how this is related to the case by the chametz and lending, whether it's considered collateral as to who was considered to have owned it, and that there's distinction if the borrower specifies to the lender that he should only collect from now. This is further qualified. New Mishnah: if a ruin collapsed on your chametz, it's considered to not be in your ownership anymore. Rabban Gamliel clarifies that this applies only if it's buried deep enough that a dog can't unearth it while searching for it. The Gemara says an opinion that you'd also need to nullify it in your heart. The depth that it needs to be buried for this to apply is 3 handbreadths. Similarly, if you need to safeguard somebody's money, you should also bury it at least a handbreadth deep. New Mishnah: if somebody, a non-Kohen, accidentally eats chametz teruma on Passover, he repays it plus a fifth. If it was eaten deliberately, then you don't need to repay any of the teruma's value. The Gemara further qualifies these points. It's discussed further. There's more on this. It discusses if chametz can or can't acquire the sanctity of teruma on Passover. There's sources that imply not, but it's debated. There are similar points. It says that food less than an egg volume cannot generate impurities, so if grape juice is squeezed out of grapes that are impure, if there's less than an egg's volume, the juice is pure, which is discussed a bit further. There are related points brought. There's a bit of a lengthier point from here about the laws of teruma in regards to how they can contract or generate ritual impurity, a topic which was more broadly discussed in the first chapter. These points on certain sacrifices, crushing grapes, and how they relate to some laws of impurity are discussed further. New Mishnah: there is a biblical obligation to eat matzah on the first night of Passover. It can be made of wheat, barley, spelt, rye, or oats. It can be made with demai, questionably tithe produce, or from ma'aser rishon, which teruma was removed from it, or redeemed ma'aser sheni, or consecrated produce. Kohanim can eat matzah made from the challah portion tithe or from teruma. You cannot eat matzah made from tevel, untithed produce, or ma'aser rishon, which you haven't separated teruma from, or non-redeemed ma'aser sheni or consecrated produce. With the unleavened loaves of a Thanksgiving offering or unleavened wafers of the Nazir offering, if you made them for yourself with intent to use them as offerings, you can't use them as matzah, but if they were made to be sold in the market, you can use them for matzah. The Gemara elaborates on the definition of the 5 grains that matzah can be made from, along with the verses that bring the source for this. Some say based on the verses that you're not fully liable for the punishment of kares, for eating dough that was kneaded with wine, oil, or honey instead of water, as these are considered to be similar to fruit juice, which we say cannot cause dough to leaven. The points on tithes we mentioned as to which kinds of foods and their relation can be used validly for matzah are discussed further, and it also brings some sources. It also gets into whether you can make matzah from grain that has the sanctity of ma'aser sheni, which is a disputed point. It also further debates the permissibility of making dough with wine, oil, or honey. We also say that you can't knead the dough with lukewarm water, which accelerates the leavening process, which is discussed. It also brings a source that you cannot use the bikurim, the first of the fruits, by wheat and barley, which were donated to the Kohanim, as matzah, which is also debated at length. It also explains how the matzah is called lechem oini, poor man's bread, which excludes several nicer types of loaves. It also discusses the thickness of matzah. Some say it's compared to the lechem hapanim, the showbread in the temple, which wasn't leavened either and was a handbread thick. So some say it can be up to that thickness too, but others reject this comparison. We say what it refers to by prohibiting thick loaves just means that you can't bake many loaves, as you're excessively exerting yourself on the holiday, which would actually apply by all holidays. We also say that you can make matzah with white bread, coarse bread, or with decorated shapes on the surface, although some disagree about decorated shapes, as then you'll take too long and the bread will leaven and rise. Some say it's allowed if it's with thinner rolled dough. It also says some unique kinds of bread, wafers, pan loaf, honey bread, and others, which are exempt from the obligation to separate a portion of challah, which is then donated to the Kohanim. This is debated. We also say in the discussion that you can use half-baked matzah, which means that you can break it in half without strands of dough stretching out of it. The points on what types of bread need to have the challah portion tithe separated from them is further discussed. It also goes through the remaining points on making matzah using the listed tithe-related produce. We also bring sources for the fact that you can't use matzah made from the Thanksgiving or Nazirite offering, as they're made for yourself, which are debated. And we said that they're permissible if it's made for the market, as when you do that, you're anticipating the possibility that they won't be sold, in which case they'll be used for the Passover obligation of matzah, so they're allowed to be used. New Mishnah. The other obligation besides for matzah to eat on Passover is marror, bitter herbs. This could be any of the following vegetables: romaine lettuce, horseradish, palm tree, vine, wormwood, and others. You can eat them whether they're moist or dry, but not when they're preserved, stewed, or cooked. You need to eat an olive-sized portion, so you can eat several of these to combine to that amount. You can eat the stalks of the plants with questionably tithed produce, with ma'aser rishon, which has had its teruma separated, and with ma'aser sheni and consecrated produce, which were redeemed. The Gemara defines a lot of the vegetables listed above and gives an expanded list. Some say the vegetable must be a bitter herb which has sap and is pale green. This is discussed along with source for these laws. It also says you're allowed to plant any vegetable which is valid as marror together on one bed, without violating the prohibition against planting different mixtures of plants together on a bed that is 6x6 handbreadths with 4 types on the sides and one in the center, as discussed in Tractate Shabbos on page 84b. So this wouldn't just apply to seeds, it would also apply by these vegetables, even romaine lettuce, which hardens as its stalk thickens. It nevertheless doesn't require additional space in spite of that. In regards to the marror being allowed to be moist or dry, that is said to apply just to the stalk. The leaves are only viable to use if they're moist. We also say, similar to matzah, ma'aser sheni vegetables cannot be used as marror. New Mishnah. There are many things not allowed on Passover, as they could cause you to create chametz. You cannot soak bran for chickens, although you may scald it. A woman can't soak bran to use as a cleaning agent in a bath, but she can use bran for her skin. You can't chew wheat grain to place on a wound, as that turns it into chametz. The Gemara says that things which were baked then cooked, or scalded in boiling water, cannot become chametz. There are similar points listed, like not to thicken a pot of food with flour of oven-dried grain, as if it didn't bake properly, it can make chametz. There are related points, and it says it's better not to soak grain on Passover, barley, or even wheat. Some say it's outright forbidden. This is further discussed. There are similar cases. A ship laden with wheat sank in a river before Passover, and the salvaged wheat was impermissible to be sold to Jews, as it was chametz, which is discussed further, along with points on the permissibility of thickening a pot with flour made from oven-dried grain. New Mishnah. Further on this topic of not doing things that can make chametz, you cannot add flour to a certain type of meat dip or to mustard. If you do, some say you should eat it immediately, others don't allow this. The Paschal offering cannot be cooked in liquid or fruit juice, but it can be basted or dipped in them. Back to chametz. Water used by a baker to cool his hands must be poured out in case dough gets stuck inside, and becomes leavened. The Gemara qualifies the argument on eating the dip that's by mustard. By the meat dip, everybody agrees that it must be burnt immediately. Sources are brought. This is discussed along with points on the proper methods of preparation of the Passover offering that was brought back by the temple, that it also can't be partially roasted or cooked, but it can be fully cooked to a char. You also can't eat it raw. There are further points. Points on the laws of proper preparation of the Paschal offering are further brought. There's more on this in regards to disposing the water that a baker uses to wash his hands. If there's a lot of it, it should be poured onto an inclined surface where it can't pool. We also say that you should only knead matzah using water that slept, called mayim shalanu, meaning that it was left overnight, so it cools off beforehand. It also says not to knead matzah in the sun, which would heat up the dough, or with sun-heated water, or with other variants of hot water. You should also not stop during the entire process of making matzah to prevent it from having time to ferment. You should also have 2 separate water vessels, one for the dough and one to cool your hands. In the event that you needed matzah using warm water, there's a disagreement if this dough is permissible as matzah, and the logics are briefly explained. And that's the end of Chapter 2. Chapter 3 of Tractate Pesachim further goes through the laws of not owning chametz, leavened bread essentially, of any sort on the holiday of Passover. The first Mishnah gives a list of similar foods and substances that you're not allowed to own on Passover. Babylonian kutach, which was a wheat-based dip of some sort, Median beer and Idumean vinegar, which contain a chametz, Egyptian zissum, a drink which contained grain, saffron, and salt, bran water, which was used by dyers, bread made from unripe grain to absorb pot fluids while cooking, kolon, which is either shoemaker's glue or a depilatory, and women's cosmetics. Generally, anything made from grain that has leaven, you're biblically forbidden to own it on Passover. The above listed substances are biblically forbidden to be eaten, but there's no punishment of concise for doing so. The Gemara defines all of these foods and substances further, along with some additional details, like the fact that kutach is very unhealthy, how most of those foods are made, and how they contain grain and similar. The chametz listed above are foods that are either proper chametz but blended in a mixture, or not blended but inedible. According to this opinion, both are still prohibited biblically, and we try to figure out who exactly holds this. Sources for this and those who disagree are discussed. Some also hold that generally, in regards to laws of permissible and forbidden foods, usually the minimum to be problematic is an olive-sized volume. Generally, by eating an olive-sized volume, if you eat the minimum possible amount, but it's only partially a forbidden food and partially a permitted one, it isn't problematic. Besides for forbidden foods, by a person who took a Nazarite oath, like wine or grapes, based on a source. This discussion is debated further. The source for this topic are also debated at length. There are further points. Some say a permitted and impermissible food combine if they're eaten together at the same time, but not if they're eaten one after the other, unlike 2 different forbidden foods, which combine if they're eaten within a certain period. New Mishnah. If there's leavened dough stuck in the cracks of a kneading trowel, if there's an olive-sized volume in one place, it must be disposed of. If it's less, it's nullified due to its small size. The same applies by laws of impurity, as will be explained, but if you object to the small dough being there, it's considered an interposition in regards to these laws, but if you want the dough there, it's not considered an interposition, and is considered to be part of the trowel. The Gemara clarifies, saying that the dough is the size of an olive, but got stuck in the water-holding part of the trowel, so you don't need to dispose of it. There are sources which disagree with this, which are brought. We argue which way we hold like. We also say that we hold like the opinion that says that if you have a block of leaven and you designate it as a seat, you don't need to dispose of it. Some say you're required to also coat it with plaster. If you have the dough trowel and you have 2 half-olive-sized volume pieces of dough and they're connected by a strand of dough, if the pieces would both be pulled out if you pulled on the connecting strand of dough, they're considered connected and must be disposed of. Elsewise, no. This doesn't apply if they're just sitting in your house, meaning not stuck in a trowel, as you might just end up sweeping them together, which would be problematic. This is further qualified. We also hold that bread which became moldy by laws of impurity and chametz on Passover, it's still considered to be food as long as a dog would be willing to eat it. There are some other related points on this. It also explains the points about laws of impurity by the trowel and how, as mentioned, there are circumstances where the dough acts as an interposition. New Mishnah. If dough is not showing signs of leavening, if there's a comparable piece of dough that became chametz, then the other piece is also not allowed to be owned on Passover. The Gemara says, if you don't have a comparable piece of dough, then the piece is considered chametz if enough time has passed for a person to walk a mil, which is about 2,000 cubits, which is about the distance from Migdal Nunaya until Tiberia. We also say that the distance that's necessary to be traveled by a hired kneader who is traveling to immerse his customer's utensil, the distance you should walk to pray in a synagogue while traveling, and the distance you should walk to be able to wash your hands before eating bread is 4 mil. Some also include the time of leatherworking in this, which is a discussion in a later tractate. This is qualified that you need to walk 4 mil out of your way in the direction you're traveling, but if you need to go backwards, you'd only need to go if it's less than a mil. New Mishnah. In regards to separating the challah dough piece tithe for Kohanim, which is impure on Passover, it should only be designated after it's baked. Some say you should put it in cold water so it doesn't leaven. Others say that this is chametz which you're allowed to own on Passover, and you should just hold on to it until after Passover ends, and it doesn't really matter if it leavened. The Gemara debates the argument at the end as to whether the original owner of the challah is retaining an amount of ownership of the dough. This is discussed further. There are some related points discussed, and they're qualified at length. This largely discusses points on the laws of Matzah, a topic more broadly discussed in Tractate Shabbos and Tractate Beah in regards to holidays, in regards to if they're biblical or not, and points on the punishments that were required by the times of the temple if you violated certain laws of Shabbos or holidays and how they relate to each other. There's dispute if there's a punishment of lashes if you bake on a holiday for weekday use. Based on whether you hold there's a theoretical possibility that guests might arrive who the food could then be given to. We also discuss how this relates to our discussion about baking loaves, which challah hasn't been separated from, in regards to the theoretical possibility of separating challah from those loaves. It argues as to who we rule like in regards to what we do with this challah tithe on Passover. There are some additional points. It says that some would only bake a maximum of 3/4 of a kav at a time on Passover, but others disagreed. There are some other unresolved points. New Mishnah. If 3 people are baking their own batches of dough, Rabban Gamliel says you can bake them in one oven, one batch at a time. The rabbis say that it should be that one person should be kneading while one is shaping their dough, while one person is baking. Rabbi Akiva is of the opinion that not all women baking, nor all wood, nor all ovens are alike, so someone might get delayed and the dough could leaven. Generally, if the dough starts rising, you should wet your hands with cold water and wipe it on the dough to reduce the leavening process. The Gemara clarifies these arguments. New Mishnah, incompletely leavened dough must be burned, but you're not liable if you eat it. Furrowed dough, partially leavened, must be burned, and if eaten, you're liable for kares. Incompletely leavened dough is if it's developed cracks as thin as locust antenna, and furrowed dough is where the cracks interlace. Others say you're liable for kares for eating either of these, and the classification of incompletely leavened dough is if it's pale. The Gemara clarifies this and says the disagreement is that the second opinion holds that dough with cracks is essentially furrowed, as if there's cracks on the surface, it means there are deeper cracks within. New Mishnah. If the 14th of Nisan, the day before Passover, falls out on Shabbos, we dispose of our chametz before Shabbos. Others say we dispose of our chametz on Shabbos. Others say we dispose of our teruma chametz before and our non-consecrated chametz on Shabbos. The Gemara says an opinion that holds like the last view. New Mishnah. You can rid yourself of chametz biblically by either verbally nullifying it or by searching for and burning it. We do both. However, if you're traveling away from home on the 14th of Passover to do a mitzvah, for instance, to have your Passover offering, to circumcise your son, or to attend a betrothal feast of your father-in-law, and you remember that you have chametz in your house, if you can, you should run back, dispose of your chametz, and then go to your mitzvah. If you can't, you should just verbally nullify it. If you are traveling away from home to rescue people from invading troops, from a flooding river, from bandits, from a fire, or from a collapsing building, and remember that you have chametz, you should just verbally nullify it. If you are traveling for an optional reason, like to establish your Techum boundary in a different location, you need to go back to get rid of your chametz. Similarly, if you're traveling back from Jerusalem and remember that you have sacrificial meats with you, if you've passed Sophim, a village, the furthest point from where the temple was visible, you should just burn it right there. If not, you should go back to Jerusalem and burn it in its proper place by the Temple Mount. In regards to both of these, chametz and forbidden meats, some say the amount you need to return for is an egg volume, others say it's an olive volume, and others say by sacrificial meat it's an olive, and by chametz it's an egg volume. The Gemara says that the point by a betrothal feast actually depends if you hold that that's a mitzvah or not. Some say that a feast that's unrelated to a mitzvah, a Torah scholar should not benefit from. Examples are given, and this is discussed. It gives some instances of marriages between sages and the daughters of Kohanim. It also says an opinion that someone who benefits from an optional feast will eventually be exiled based on some verses. There are further points on the negativities of overindulgence and the importance of marrying into the families of Torah scholars. There are further points on this and on not being an ignoramus. Some actually reverse the sages who said the opinions on the minimums being olive or egg-sized that you need to travel back for in regards to chametz or sacrificial meats. Others say not to and resolve an apparent contradiction by the laws of the minimum amount of food required to join a zimun after blessing by saying there the dispute is based on a verse, while here it's based on a logical comparison to the laws of impurity. It also gets into a point about Mashiach's coming. A verse is interpreted either that the sun's light will be far greater by Mashiach, or complicated laws will be simply understood then, or people who are rich and famous in this world will be irrelevant by Mashiach's coming. It says a story about a sage who became sick and fell into a coma, and saw such a world where the Torah scholars were praised, along with the two martyrs of the city of Lud, who falsely admitted to murdering the emperor's daughter and were executed by a Tyrannus. There are further points about Mashiach, about the great donations to the temple, about the wealth of the Jewish people, and similar about how all blessings, when you hear about any occurrence, will all be for good. It also says how God's name will be written when Mashiach comes, and some points in that regard. And that's the end of chapter 3. Chapter 4 of Tractate Pesachim continues on the laws of Passover, but also covers a number of topics in regards to the concept of not deviating from customs of your native town. The Mishnah says, in a place where the custom of your town is to work just before Passover starts until midday, you can also do work then. If the custom is to not work then, you may not. If you go from a place where they do work before midday to a place where they do not, or vice versa, he has to hold like the stringent location where he cannot do work. Generally, a person shouldn't deviate from his local custom to avoid conflict. Similarly, if you're transporting crops during the sabbatical year when they're not harvested from a place where there are no crops to a place where there are, or vice versa, you're obligated to remove them. Rabbi Yehuda says that he should go out and bring for yourself, which will be defined. The Gemara says why the case discussed is with working before Passover and not, say, Shabbos, as we stop working before Passover a bit earlier. Alternatively, it's because there was a more severe punishment of excommunication by violating this by Passover. There are related points on abstaining from work by Shabbos and holidays discussed. It also talks about generally things that prevent you from receiving blessing, like relying on your wife's earnings, profiting from selling cane or jars as they have great bulk, so you'll be affected by the evil eye, and other similar points. It also says you'll only receive blessing when working on writing Torah, tefillin, mezuzahs, or vending for those and similar, if you do the work for the sake of a mitzvah. There are some other customs of towns discussed, like the people of one area who separated the challah tithe from rice, which was said to be incorrect. This and many other particular customs of areas are discussed further. This is qualified. It also goes through the punishments that were administered for violating certain of these principles, like excommunication and otherwise, and there are some additional points. This is all discussed further in regards to other regional customs. Even more laws are discussed on this. New Mishnah. If a location's custom is to sell small livestock to non-Jewish people, that's the custom we follow. Otherwise, not. You weren't allowed to sell large livestock to non-Jewish people out of concern that people would rent or lend them out, and the animals would be used on Shabbos, which is not allowed. Some say it's allowed to sell a maimed animal, which would just be used to be slaughtered, and others allow the sale of a horse. If the custom of your location is to eat roasted meat on the nights of Passover, that's what you can eat. If that's not your custom, then you can't. The Gemara says you can't designate meat for Passover because it resembles consecration for a sacrifice, which you're then eating outside of Jerusalem. This doesn't apply by wheat, as it's just that you're guarding it and keeping it from leavening over Passover. There's disagreement on the point on meat designation. It said that a man named Tadas of Rome did something similar, but he was nevertheless not excommunicated, as he was a great man who would assist Torah scholars. New Mishnah. If the custom of your place is to light a lamp by the night of Yom Kippur, you should light a lamp. If not, then you don't. Everywhere, however, you can light lamps in synagogues, study halls, in dark alleys, and for the sick. The Gemara cites some sources. There's also this discussion that you say that you have double blessing on a flame only when Shabbos ends, as that's when fire was created. This is discussed further in regards to the proper blessing formatting of the Adela prayer, and the Gemara argues as to when fire was created. One source says that there were 10 things created on the eve before the first Shabbos: Miriam's well, the manna, the rainbow, the Hebrew letters, the stylus used to engrave the 10 Commandments, the tablets of the 10 Commandments, Moshe's burial place, the cave where Moshe prayed by the golden calf and where Eliyahu hid, the mouth of Balaam's donkey, and the opening of the pit which would swallow Korach and his followers. Some add to this list fire and the mule, the ram that Avram slaughtered instead of Yitzchak, and the shamir worm which was used to build the temple. Some also said the first pair of tongs, but others disagree. Anyways, so we see that the difference is that the fire mentioned in this list is the fire of Gehenna, while our fire was made right as Shabbos ended. But there's a different source which says that there were 7 things created before the world itself, which were Torah, repentance, Gan Eden, the Garden of Eden, Gehenna, God's throne of glory, the temple, and the name of Mashiach, all based on verses. So we clarify that the space of Gehenna was made before the world, but the fire of Gehenna was made on the second day of creation based off a different discussion. And actually, our fire was thought to be created just before Shabbos and was actually made as Shabbos ended, and we bring a source. Some add to the list of things created just before the first Shabbos: Aaron's staff, demons, and Adam's garments. On another list, there are 7 things concealed from people: the day of their passing, their consolation, the depth of judgment, what other people are thinking, how your business dealings will result, when the dynasty of David will return with Mashiach's coming, and when our exile will end. It also says that there are 3 things that God thought to create during the creation of the world and were made later: the fact that corpses decompose, that mourners should eventually forget about the deceased, and that produce should rot. Some add that currency systems should function. New Mishnah: in a place where the custom is to work on the fast of Tisha B'Av, you can work. If it's not, then you don't. Everywhere, however, Torah scholars don't work. Some say that everybody could refrain from work on this day without appearing haughty. The Gemara qualifies these points. There's a repetition of an argument from Tractate Pesachim 16b in regards to not appearing haughty regarding not working by this fast by Tisha B'Av, and contrary opinions by a groom not saying the Shema prayer on the night of his wedding. New Mishnah: in Judea they had the custom to work just before Passover until midday, while in Galilee they would not work at all. Beis Shammai does not allow working on the night of the 14th, but Beis Hillel allows it until sunrise. The Gemara qualifies these opinions further. New Mishnah: Rabbi Meir says any labor began before the 14th can be finished on the 14th. You can't start a labor on the 14th, even if it finishes before midday. The rabbis say tailors, barbers, and launderers can work before Passover until midday. Some also add shoemakers. The Gemara debates if Rabbi Meir's opinion is discussing general labor or labor needed for a holiday or what. In the end, based on sources, we say he'd allow labor if it's a circumstance where it's for a holiday need and it's to complete an unfinished task. Tailors are uniquely allowed, as an unskilled person can sew in an unusual manner during the intermediate days of the holiday, and barbers and launderers can also do the work, as someone who returns from overseas or is released from prison is allowed to cut their hair or do laundry during these days. And some also allow shoemakers, as those making the holiday pilgrimage were allowed to repair their shoes during these days. The disagreement on shoes is if you can derive the allowance of making shoes from the fact that you can repair them. New Mishnah: you can put eggs under hens on the 14th of Nisan. If the hen ran off, you can put it back. If it died, you can swap it out. On the 14th, you can clear feces from beneath an animal's feet, but on the intermediate days of the holiday, you can only move it to the sides of the stall. You can take utensils to and from a craftsman's house, even though they're not needed for the holiday. The Gemara clarifies that the fact that you can return a hen to the eggs is during the intermediate days of the holiday. There's disagreement if you can do this after 3 days since it left, as at that point it no longer wants to brood, so the eggs are no longer usable. The disagreement is if we're concerned about a minimal loss or not. The other points are also argued on. New Mishnah: the residents of Jericho had 6 unique practices. 3 were allowed. They would graft palm trees on the 14th of Nisan, they would wrap the Shema prayer, which will be explained what that means, and they would reap and stack their grain before the Omer offering. 3 practices they did were criticized by the rabbis, which were that they would allow the branches used by the temple treasury for personal use, they would eat fallen fruit from beneath trees on Shabbos, and they would give payah charity from vegetables, which was problematic in regards to tithes. The Gemara says similarly there were 6 things that King Chizkiah did. 3 the sages agreed with, which were that he dragged the bones of his wicked father Achaz on a bier of ropes, he crushed the copper serpent that Moshe had made, and he hid the book of remedies written by King Shlomo, which had the cure for every single illness. There were 3 things that sages disagreed with that he did, which were that he cut down the doors of the temple and sent them to the king of Syria, he stocked up the waters of the Gihon River, thinking there would be a siege, and he once made the year a leap year during Nisan when it's too late to do that. It goes through the above points, how they would graft the trees, opinions as to what wrapping the Shema means. Some say that they would not have a separation between the first Shema verse and the rest of the paragraph. Some say the lack of a break was elsewhere. It's discussed. It also says why we see the verse Baruch Shem between the Shema verses, which isn't in the Torah, as it's taught that right before the forefather Yaakov was going to pass, he called his sons to tell them what would happen in the future with Mashiach's coming and whatnot, but the divine presence left him right then, so he was upset, thinking that he had done something wrong, but his sons told him reassuringly the Shema verse, and he responded saying Baruch Shem. There's still question if we say it, as it's not explicitly written as a part of the Shema, so we say it quietly instead. Some said it loudly back in those days so heretics wouldn't cause issues with their questions as to what was being said, but others did not. The remaining points here are further discussed. This is all qualified further. There are additional points on the Peah charity and the offerings of sacrifices, and it says that one man, Yisachar from Barkai, a Kohen Gadol, would wrap his hand while performing the temple service. So he was punished that a king and queen of the Hashmonaean dynasty started arguing if kid meat is better than lamb meat, so they decided to summon the Kohen Gadol to resolve this dispute, who answered disrespectfully and said that lamb must be better as it's brought every day as a part of the Talmud offering. So the king didn't like his disrespect and ordered his right hand cut off. So Yisachar tried to bribe the hand cutter to only get his left hand cut off, which happened, but the king found out and he ended up getting his right hand cut off also anyways. It also says that clearly this guy had no idea what he was talking about, as there are clear verses implying that they're equally preferable. And that's the end of chapter 4. Chapter 5 of Tractate Pesachim starts a lengthy discussion on the exact laws of the Paschal offering, the Karban Pesach as it was called, which was brought during the times of the temple as one of the types of animal offerings for the altar by the holiday of Passover. The first Mishnah says, every day by the temple there were 2 offerings, known as the Tamid offerings, which were offered in the temple in the morning and in the afternoon. The timing of these is relevant, as basically the only type of offering brought after the afternoon Tamid offering was the Passover offering. The afternoon Talmud offering was normally slaughtered at 8.5 hours into the day and offered at 9.5 hours. Before Passover, it was slaughtered at 7.5 hours and offered at 8.5 hours, be it a weekday or a Shabbos. If it was a Friday, it's slaughtered at 6.5 hours and offered at 7.5 hours. The Passover offering is always brought after this. The Gemara cites and debates some sources for these points. There's also disagreement on the variance between the regular timing and the Shabbos timing. Some say it's this, some say they're the same time based on concern if the meat will spoil or not. These opinions and timings are further debated. There are also additional sources brought for the other points, and it goes through some of the order of the services in the temple, which are discussed. There are other verses which are debated. New Mishnah. If you slaughter the Paschal offering with improper intents, such as that it should be for a different type of offering, or did any of the animals blood reception or throwing or otherwise with the wrong intent, or if you began with the proper intent and then switched to a different incorrect intent, for instance intending to bring a Paschal offering and then switching mentally that it should be for a Shlamim offering instead, or started with the incorrect intent and switched to the correct intent, for instance that it should be a Shlamim offering, and then you switch to that it should be for a Paschal offering, the offering is invalid. The Gemara debates the circumstance of these improper intents as to what exactly is going on, if it's an improper intent that switched in the middle of one offering, or he had 2 different intents during 2 offerings. There are many sources brought debating which it's referring to. It ends off unresolved. What about during the rest of the year? The animal of a Paschal offering could be validly brought as a Shlamim offering. So what's the law if you express intents for both types of sacrifices over there? Some say yes, and the logic is debated. What about by the rest of the year if this offering is slaughtered with the incorrect intents as to the owner? A comparison is drawn to the improper intent of sacrifice, which is disallowed by the Passover offering, but is fine by the rest of the year, so too with the correct intent of the owner. But that's actually rejected after some debate, and we say that an improper intent of the ownership of the sacrifice invalidates the offering by the rest of the year. New Mishnah. Some further improper intents that invalidate a Paschal offering. Slaughtering it for people who can't eat it, for people not registered on it, for people without a circumcision, for somebody with ritual impurity. So by all these, it's invalid. If you slaughtered it with intent for it to be both for a valid person and also for one of these invalid people, it's valid. If you slaughter the offering before midday, it's invalid, as the verse says, in the afternoon. If it's slaughtered before the afternoon Tamid offering, it's actually still valid, so long as the blood of this offering is being stirred until the point that the Tamid offering's blood is thrown. But if you throw the Paschal offering's blood first, it's nevertheless still valid. The Gemara cites further sources for these points. If the Paschal offering was brought for circumcised people, but it was also intended that an uncircumcised person should be atoned through the throwing of the blood, there's disagreement if this is valid or not, based on whether the secondary intent works. It's debated further. Further points on laws regarding uncircumcised individuals in this offering are clarified. There's also a story where a rabbi asked to be taught some teachings and requested to be told the difference between a Paschal offering that was offered for its own sake and also not for its own sake, where it's invalid, and an offering that was brought both for people that can and cannot eat it, where it is valid. So he was told 4 differences. By the offering also not being for its own sake, the invalidation is on the sacrifice itself. You cannot identify which is the prohibited portion. It's relevant during all 4 services of the bringing of the offering, and it applies to both communal and individual offerings, all unlike an offering that was also brought for the wrong person. One of the things the rabbi also asked to be taught was about the book of Yochanan, an exposition on the book of Chronicles, which was forgotten, and it says, therefore the strength of the sages was weakened. There are further points on this topic discussed. New Mishnah. If the Paschal offering is slaughtered while you're in possession of Chametz, that's a violation of the negative commandment. As the verse says, you shall not slaughter the blood of my sacrifice over Chametz. Rabbi Yehuda says that this would also apply to the Tamid offering on this day. Rabbi Shimon holds that if the Paschal offering is properly slaughtered while you own Chametz, you're liable, but if it's brought with improper intent, not for the sake of this offering, then you'd be exempt. And all other sacrifices on this day, if slaughtered while you have Chametz, you're exempt. During Passover itself, if the Paschal offering is slaughtered with intent to be a Paschal offering while you have Chametz, you can't even bring this offering at that time, so you'd be exempt. But if it was intended to be a different offering, or you actually slaughtered a different offering on Passover itself while you have Chametz, you're liable. The only exception to this would be a Chatas offering that was slaughtered not for its own sake, as such an offering is just invalid anyways. The Gemara clarifies an opinion that you're only liable if the Chametz in question belonged to the slaughterer, or to the thrower of the blood, or to one of the members of the group that's bringing this offering. There's debate if this applies just inside the temple courtyard or not, possibly based on an interpretation of a verse, or possibly as the only warning you can give a person in this regard. As you don't know what chametz they may own in their house is a questionable warning, and they disagree about the effectiveness about such a warning. Some actually do say that the argument is over the verse, and it's debated further. The other points are also qualified. There are further points on these offerings discussed. New Mishnah. The Paschal offering was slaughtered in 3 groups. As the verse says, the whole assembly of the congregation of Israel shall slaughter it. Those 3 imply 3 groups. The first group would enter, the courtyard doors were shut, the shofar was blown, the Kohanim stood in rows holding silver and gold bowls, depending on the row, which were cone-shaped so that the bowls couldn't be placed down and have the blood congeal. Yisrael would slaughter the animal, and the Kohen would receive the blood, and it would be handed down until it was thrown by the base of the altar wall. The second and third groups did the same. They then said the Hallel prayer as the offerings were being finished. If it was still going on, they'd say it a second or a third time, although they never were slow enough that they finished a third Hallel prayer. The same process of the weekdays was done on Shabbos, although the sages disagreed with the fact that they'd rinse the courtyard, and the fact that they'd fill up cups of blood from the courtyard floor, which they'd throw on the altar. It also goes through how they suspended and flayed the animals and a few of the remaining particular steps. The Gemara further goes through the step-by-step process of the services of this offering, and these points are discussed further. There are some additional qualifications on these points as to the exact process and steps of this offering service, and that's the end of Chapter 5. Chapter 6 of Tractate Pesachim further deals with the laws of the bringing of the Paschal offering, specifically when the day of its offering, in the times of the temple, the 14th of the month of Nisan, just before the holiday of Passover, falls out on a Shabbos. The first Mishnah says, these are the steps of this offering that override the Shabbos restrictions: the slaughtering of the animal, the throwing of its blood on the altar, the michoy, the removal of remaining waste from its intestines, and the burning of the fats on the altar. The steps that do not override Shabbos, as they can and therefore must be postponed until after Shabbos, are the roasting and the rinsing of its intestines. Also the carrying of the offering to the temple, bringing it from outside a Tehum boundary, and severing of a blemish like a wart or similar, so it can be offered, do not override Shabbos, as they can be done before Shabbos starts. Others disagree, and Rabbi Akiva ends by saying his opinion that any form of work that could have been done before Shabbos does not override Shabbos, but the slaughter of the animal which can't be done prior can be done on Shabbos. The Gemara brings sources to prove the allowance of slaughtering the Paschal offering on a Shabbos. There are further similar laws discussed. It goes on like this for a bit, and based on one of our sources, it says that wisdom will desert the haughty and angry. There are many instances from the Torah quoted to prove related points. There are points brought in regards to sources for the offering of the Paschal and the Tamid offerings on Shabbos. It also discusses points on bringing these offerings while impure. Obviously, if you've contracted ritual impurity, you can't bring the Paschal offering. You will instead need to wait until the second opportunity by Pesach Sheni to bring this offering a month later. However, an impure congregation, impure from a corpse specifically, can bring this offering on this day. It also mentions some laws on an impure individual, from leprosy, impurity, and laws in regards to them leaving their encampment. These laws and points on different forms of impurity are further discussed. This goes on a bit further and it gets back to the parts of the Paschal offering. It says michoi, the cleaning of its intestines. Some say this step specifically means poking the intestines with a knife to drain them. Some say it means actually scraping out the waste with a knife, and they cite verses which imply like their opinions, and related verses which talk about how the righteous will resurrect the dead by Mashiach's coming, which will apply both to Jewish people and also non-Jewish people who will have greatly extended lives. There are many verses cited and discussed on this topic. The other parts of the Paschal service, the removal of blemishes, and the others are further qualified. It also talks about the great joy that the Torah scholars would learn Torah with, and some related points. The remaining points on the other steps of the sacrifice are further qualified. There are additional points on impurity and discussion of Rabbi Akiva's ending opinion that preliminaries for actions can't be done on Shabbos if they could have been done prior, who some do say we rule like. New Mishnah. In addition to the Paschal offering brought on this day of the 14th of Nisan, they also brought the holiday offering, called the Chagiga offering. If the Paschal offering is brought on a weekday, the people involved are all pure, and it's not large enough that everybody's going to be full after eating it, that's when you'd also bring the Chagiga offering. If the Paschal offering is brought on Shabbos, or there's a lot of it, or the people are impure, we don't bring a Chagiga offering. The Chagiga offering can be brought from cattle, sheep, or goats, from male or female animals, and can be eaten for 2 days and a night on the 14th, that night, and on the 15th. The Gemara discusses point in the source of this discussion, and that the Chagiga offering on the 14th of Nisan is not actually obligatory. So this and a few additional laws are discussed, along with a scriptural comparison between the Paschal offering and the Chagiga offering on the 14th by Passover. These points are further qualified. We also cite some disagreement if this Chagiga offering overrides Shabbos or not, which is discussed. There are some additional points on types of holiday offerings, and these are further discussed. New Mishnah. We said there's a special exception to slaughter the Paschal offering on Shabbos. So according to some, if you bring a Paschal offering and slaughter it with improper intents, intending that it should be a different offering or slaughter the wrong animal, that's an inadvertent violation of the laws of Shabbos, and now you're liable to actually bring a Chatas offering. If you slaughter the correct animal, but one which wasn't consecrated as a Paschal offering, it was consecrated as a different offering, it's an argument if you're liable or exempt. The logic of these opinions is disputed. Some other intents that would make this an improper offering, and if offered on Shabbos, therefore liable, is if it's offered for people who are not registered for the animal, or for an uncircumcised person, or for an impure person. If it was for one of those cases, and also a permissible individual too, then you'd be exempt. Also, if you slaughter the Paschal offering on Shabbos and after the animal is found to have a blemish, you're liable for violating the Shabbos, and if there's a physical defect found inside the animal, then you'd be exempt. If the offering was slaughtered and they found that the owner of the offering had withdrawn from it, or they died, or had become impure, then you're exempt, as you couldn't have known about that. The Gemara qualifies specifics about these cases. These points and some additional on laws of impurity are discussed further. There is some further qualification in regards to the laws of Shabbos. It goes further and discusses some additional cases if the person bringing the offering passes away in the middle or withdrew. Some say it becomes a shlamim offering and can be immediately burnt, according to one opinion. It's discussed. And that's the end of chapter 6. Chapter 7 of Tractate Pesachim covers some additional points in the bringing of the Paschal offering in the temple by the holiday of Passover. The Mishnah says the Paschal offering is roasted. A spit of pomegranate wood is used, spearing the animal through both ends, with the legs and entrails placed inside the animal. Others say that the legs and entrails are hung on the spit outside of the carcass. You can't use a metal spit or a grill. A Rav Tzadok one time had his Passover offering roasted on a grill. The Gemara says why we specifically use pomegranate wood, not metal, which will heat up and cook the animal instead of the fire doing it. And you can't use palm, fig, oak, or sycamore wood, which will secrete liquid, which is considered cooking, not roasting. And the pomegranate wood either doesn't have knots, which secrete liquid, or it's a first-year sapling, and the point where it's separate from the tree is the part sticking out of the animal's mouth, so all of the branches' secretions will just fall to the ground. There are further specifications of this offering discussed. There's some additional discussion in regards to the concern of the presence of blood, and how that applies with other situations like meat in regards to cooking and salting by arteries and veins and similar. Other points from above and related verses are also discussed. These points are qualified further. New Mishnah. As the Paschal offering should be cooked only from the roasting of the fire, if the meat touches the surface of the earthenware oven, that part should be peeled off. If some of the meat fluids dripped into the oven and then splashed back onto the meat, that area should be removed. If it dropped onto nearby hot flour and got cooked, a handful of flour must be removed from that place. If the animal was smeared with teruma oil, then only Kohanim can eat it. If the carcass is raw, it should be rinsed. If it's roasted, the outside should be peeled off. If it was smeared with ma'aser sheni oil, that value shouldn't be charged, as ma'aser sheni cannot be sold in Jerusalem. The Gemara qualifies some of these laws. This is all discussed further. New Mishnah. 5 offerings can be brought while communally impure, but may not be eaten while impure. The Omer offering, the 2 loaves offering, the panim bread, the communal shlamim offering, and the chatas he-goat by Rosh Chodesh, the new month. A Paschal offering that's brought while communally impure can be eaten while impure, as it's only brought in the first place for eating. The Gemara excludes from this list the Chagiga offering brought on the first day of Passover, the 15th of Nisan. This is further discussed. The above points and others in regards to these offerings are further qualified. This is all discussed a bit further. There are a few other points in regards to these offerings and laws of purity and impurity in regards to them being brought. There are some more additional points which go on about this for a bit. New Mishnah. If the meat of your Paschal offering became impure, but the fats on the altar are still fine, you don't throw blood on the altar. In the opposite case, if the fats became impure but the meat is fine, you do throw the blood. By other types of offering, if the meat is impure and the fats are fine, you would still throw the blood. The Gemara says an opinion, if the case is where the meat of the offering became impure, but you still threw the blood, it's fine, it works. It's disputed on the necessity to eat the offerings, or if that's just a mitzvah, not a main part of the acceptance of the offering. These points are discussed further. There's some further argument on the discussed cases. New Mishnah. If the community or its majority became impure, or the Kohanim were impure but the community was pure, they could make the Paschal offering in this state. If a minority of the community was impure, the majority of the community makes the Paschal offering, and the impure minority has to wait for the second opportunity by the second Paschal offering on Pesach Sheni a month later. The Gemara cites some sources which discuss these cases. These points on impurity and similar are further discussed. There are some additional cases. Some say if exactly half of a community is pure and exactly the other half is impure, one person should become impure so that way they could all just bring the offering. This is discussed in regards to its logic and methodology. There's another case. What if a third of the community is pure, a third is impure from an emission, and a third is impure from corpses? Some say the corpse impurity ones don't get to make either Paschal offering, not the first time, as the other impurity type and the pure groups join, making the corpse impurities the minority, who don't make the offering, and then with a second Paschal offering opportunity, the other impure groups join together with the corpse group, making them a majority who don't get to make the Pesach Sheni offering. New Mishnah. In regards to a Paschal offering that the blood was thrown and afterwards you find out that it was impure, the tzitz renders it permissible. If the owner himself was impure, then this doesn't work, and the logic is explained. The Gemara discusses these principles. Points on laws of purity on this topic are qualified further. There are some sources on this topic discussed, and some points on additional further laws of impurity. New Mishnah. If the offering or its majority became impure, they burn it before the temple with wood from the altar pyre. If the minority of it became impure or its leftover meats, they burn them in their own courtyards or roofs with their own wood. Some misers would anyways burn it before the temple to use their pyre wood, so they wouldn't need to use their own wood. The Gemara says that the reason that the impure offering must be burnt before the temple in such a manner is that presumably it became impure due to negligence, so we want them to have to do something in a slightly embarrassing manner so that way they're discouraged from doing this again. The point are further discussed. New Mishnah. A Paschal offering that was taken out of Jerusalem or became impure on the 14th should be immediately burnt. If the owners became impure or died, it must be left overnight so its appearance changes, and is burnt on the 16th of Nisan. Others say it should be burnt immediately because nobody's eating it. The Gemara cites some sources. These are discussed further. It also says that the dispute in regards to if the owner became impure or died applies after the throwing of the blood. If it was before, meaning the meat is never fit to be eaten, everyone says that it should be burnt immediately. The opinions are further debated. New Mishnah. Bones, sinews, and leftover flesh from the Paschal offering must be burnt on the 16th of Nisan. If that date was a Shabbos, they're burnt on the 17th, as this doesn't override the Shabbos. The Gemara discusses some additional rulings in regards to the bones of these offerings. This is all discussed further. There's some points in the classification of sinews. Some say only sinews from the neck are considered flesh in this regard, which is debated. Others disagree, saying the discussion is about the gid hanasha, the sciatic nerve, which is forbidden to be eaten. This is further debated with some additional points. New Mishnah. When a group registers to eat a Paschal offering, there must be enough meat for everybody to get an olive volume. Anything edible by a grown ox is considered fit to be eaten by a young kid, kid, including the ends of the shoulder blades and other cartilage. The Gemara cites some related points in regards to different classifications as to what's considered sinew. New Mishnah. The verse says, "And you shall not break a bone on it," in regards to this offering. So if you break the bone of a pure Paschal offering, there was a penalty of 40 lashes. There's no such punishment by doing this with an impure offering or by leaving over a pure Paschal offering. The Gemara discusses the verse's implication of this point and related discussion. There's a bit more lengthy qualification on these topics. It speaks on some of these laws a bit further, and there are some related points. New Mishnah. If part of the limb of a Paschal offering was stuck slightly outside of Jerusalem, you cut to the bone, peel until a joint, and cut off the bone. With other offerings, you just cut it off there, as there's no prohibition with the other offerings against breaking a bone. From the door jamb inward is deemed to be inside in regards to the border of Jerusalem. From the door jamb outward is considered to be outside. The windows and the thickness of the wall is considered to be inside. The Gemara says that these dimensions also apply by prayer in regards to which room you're in. Others disagree, saying a metal barrier doesn't block you from God. We said that the door jamb inward is considered inside, implying that the door jamb itself is considered to be outside. And then we said that the door jamb outward is considered outside, implying that the door jamb inward is inside. So we say the second part refers to the gateways of the courtyard of the temple, which are considered to be inside the temple, and the first part refers to the gateways of Jerusalem, which are considered to be outside Jerusalem. And we bring sources. Some say the rooftops and upper stories of Jerusalem and the temple courtyard are not consecrated. There's debate on this in regards to them saying the Hallel prayer on the rooftops, but we say that that wasn't a time of eating. The point is debated, and we seem to imply that this is the ruling, that the rooftops are not consecrated like the courtyards, and this is discussed. New Mishnah. If two groups were eating the same Paschal offering in one house, they don't need to face each other to show that they're part of the same group, and their kettle can be placed between them. To avoid concern of looking like you're eating in the second location, a waiter who is pouring wine must keep his mouth closed and must turn to face his group. A bride looks away from her group and eats. The Gemara discusses the source of these opinions. These opinions are discussed. Some say a bride looks away as she's embarrassed. There are further points on a group eating together in general. Some say they start eating when three are ready to start, but they can leave one at a time as long as they're entering at a typical time and the waiter is aware of their intentions. Some say that all pay the waiter's wage and the last one should pay extra, but that's not the law we hold like. And that's the end of chapter 7. Chapter 8 of Tractate Pesachim discusses some additional laws of the Paschal offering from the times in the temple. The first Mishnah says, to fulfill this obligation, you must be registered for an offering. In some cases, someone could make a registration for you. A woman's husband and father can register her. If they both did, she eats of her husband's offering. If she went to her father's house, as was the custom on the first holiday after her marriage, and both made the offering on her behalf, she can eat of whichever one she wants. An orphan whose guardians both offered a Paschal offering on her behalf, she can eat of whichever one she wants. A slave who is owned by two people cannot eat of either of their offerings. Someone who is half slave, half free, he cannot eat of his master's offering. The Gemara tries to suggest, based on this, validity to the concept of berera, retroactive determination in regards to picking an offering, but we say she is choosing an offering at the time of the actual slaughtering. There are some verses cited which compare the Jewish people to a married woman and speaks on the greatness of certain prophets. Specifically in regards to the prophet Hosea, there's lengthy interpretation on many of the verses discussed in that regard, and to several of the listed kings. There are also points on the exile of the Jewish people, why specifically to Babylonia. Some say that they were less cruel than the other nations, some say because their language is similar to Hebrew. A number of suggestions are offered. The remaining topics from earlier are further qualified. New Mishnah. If someone tells their slave to slaughter a Paschal offering for him, he can eat it whether it's a kid or a lamb. If both a kid and a lamb were offered, he can eat whichever was brought first. If the slave forgot which one he was told to offer, he should slaughter both a kid and a lamb, and specify that whichever one the master had said will be his and the other one will be mine. If the master also forgot which one he said, they just have to burn it, but they're exempt from having to bring a second one. The Gemara qualifies a few of these points, including a suggestion that as a normal person cannot be registered for two Paschal offerings at once. Some suggest the case is actually with a king and a queen, and proofs are brought. The remaining points are also qualified. This is discussed further. New Mishnah. If someone tells their sons, I'm going to bring a Paschal offering, and it's going to include the first one of you that makes it to Jerusalem, it goes to the first son to put his head and majority of his body into Jerusalem, and he gets all of his brother's portions too. The Gemara tries to suggest the existence of the principle of berera, again, retroactive determination, from this case, but we see that here the father had already registered all of them. He was just trying to encourage his sons to run to do a mitzvah. We said a number of proofs, including a time where this actually occurred, where someone did this with his sons and daughters, and the sons were lazy, but the daughters ran ahead. New Mishnah. People can always be registered to a Paschal offering so long as there's at least an olive's volume of meat on it for each of them to eat. You can register to withdraw to or from an animal until it's slaughtered. Others say until the blood is thrown onto the altar. The Gemara says that this means that a group can register to an offering, withdraw, and then a different group can register to it. Some say the dispute at the end in regards to the timing applies to people trying to withdraw from this offering. We bring sources. New Mishnah. If one person of the group without permission from the others invites a guest to share his portion, they can share the portion. However, the inviter and his guest can be made to eat separate from the rest of the group. The Gemara discusses the allowance of if someone is just taking way too much food, if you can tell him to take his portion and eat separately. There are many proofs brought both ways. We found a source which says yes, you can, and this is discussed further. There are other points in regards to registering for a Paschal offering which are discussed, and a few others. New Mishnah, there are some additional points in regards to slaughtering an offering for someone with certain forms of impurity, and which days we do that on. The Gemara qualifies these points at length. New Mishnah, there are a few unique circumstances. A mourner on the day of his relative's passing, somebody clearing stones that fell onto a person potentially killing them, meaning this person is possibly impure, someone who was told that he'd be released from prison on the night of Passover, and a sick or elderly person who are capable of eating an all-sized piece of meat, all should have the Paschal offering slaughtered for them if they are part of the group. We don't bring the offering for them individually, as there's a possibility that they won't be able to partake of the offering. If the offering was brought for them and they were later disqualified, they're still exempt from needing to re-bring the Paschal offering the second time, besides for the guy who was clearing the stones away, as he would have been impure at the time of the actual offering. The Gemara says, if the guy was in a Jewish prison and he was told he'd be released for Passover, then we could assume he will be, and he could have his own Paschal offering brought. Some say that it could even be in a non-Jewish prison, if it's in a location where it's permissible to eat the Paschal offering, as they could just take some of it to his cell and feed it to him. The points on concerns of impurity in regards to clearing rocks that fell on a person are discussed. New Mishnah, there's debate if we can bring a Paschal offering for an individual, or if it has to be for a group. Even if there's a group of 100, if they can't eat their olive-sized portion, we don't make the offering for them. We also don't make a group consisting of women, slaves, and minors. The Gemara cites some sources and discusses these points. Some say it's allowed to have a group of just women, or just slaves, or just minors. The concern is where they're mixed together, as it could lead to inappropriate activities. There are some further additional points on this. Some also say we don't make a group consisting of just converts, as they might be too meticulous and accidentally mess something up by adding details. Some say that the Paschal offering, the Matzah, and the Marror are only mandatory on the first night of Passover. Others say the Paschal offering is mandatory on all of the other nights too, for just men. New Mishnah, a mourner on the day of his relative's passing cannot eat sacrificial foods by day. This is rabbinically extended to the night also. However, such a mourner should still immerse in the mikveh and eat the Paschal offering by night, but no other types of sacrifices. Someone who hears about the passing of a relative 30 days after their passing, or somebody who's reburying his parents in a new location to a permanent burial place, has a similar status, albeit rabbinically. They, however, can immerse and eat all types of sacrificial foods at night. A convert who converted on Passover Eve, Beis Shammai says he should immerse and eat his Paschal offering. Beis Hillel says he was just circumcised, so he's impure and he must wait. The Gemara qualifies further points by these cases. Also, in regards to laws of impurity, there's an issue here with walking through an unmarked graveyard on the way to bring the Paschal offering. Some say you should blow the dust to make sure there are no bone fragments. Others say it's actually considered to be a pure area if lots of people have walked through there, as we assume the bones were removed or broken. This leniency only applies by the Paschal offering, which is much stricter in its requirements to be brought. And that's the end of chapter 8. Chapter 9 of Tractate Pesachim largely continues on the topic of the Paschal offering that was brought back in the times of the temple and offered on the 14th of the month of Nisan. However, there was a second opportunity to do this obligation based on an instance from the Torah a month later on the 14th of the following month, Iyar, called Pesach Sheni. First Mishnah says, if somebody was impure or on a faraway road on the 14th of Nisan and therefore was unable to bring the Paschal offering, he should bring the Paschal offering at his second chance a month later on the 14th of Iyar. This also applies if you're otherwise preoccupied outside of your control, but the Torah specifically mentioned being impure or being on a distant road, as those don't have the punishment of karei supply. The Gemara says a dispute. If somebody was on a faraway road and they slaughtered the offering and threw the blood on his behalf, is this valid or not? Some say yes, as the second opportunity is as the Torah is taking pity on him. So if he managed to somewhat participate in it by the first offering, then great. Others say no, he's prohibited the same way an impure person would be, and they cite proofs like their opinions. This is argued. It brings a source which discusses forms of impurity which cause you to have to wait until the second opportunity by Pesach Sheni, and a dispute if women are obligated or not in this second offering opportunity. And there's also discussion as to what the debate was for intentionally missing the Paschal offering. Rebbe says you're liable for kares for deliberately missing both, as he holds both are considered a fall holiday. Rabbi Nassan says you're exempt from missing the second, as it's only a substitute for the first. but he does not fully make up for it. Rabbi Hanania ben Akavia says you're only liable for kares for missing the first if you also deliberately miss the second, as he holds the second offering actually makes up for the first. They all cite verses to prove like their opinions. This is discussed. New Mishnah. How far do you need to be considered to be on a distant road? We say it's further than the city Moedim, that length approximately. Others say even if you're just outside the temple courtyard, as in the verse, there's a unique dot put underneath the letter in the word, which means to say a smaller amount. The Gemara says that the distance from Jerusalem to Moedin is 15 million, which is about a modern equivalent of a bit over 3,000 feet, and the calculation is given based on the assumption that you can walk 5 million from dawn to sunrise, which is calculated. The calculation is discussed further. It gets into some math in regards to astronomical calculations. It says Egypt is 400 by 400 parseos, which was an old form of measurement, and that is a 60th of Cush, which is a 60th of the world, which is a 60th of the size of the Garden of Eden, which is a 60th of Eden itself, which is a 60th of Gehenna. Some say that all of civilization is not wider than the diameter of a single star, based on the fact that you can walk in any direction and have the stars still be opposite you, which contradicts and disproves an opinion that the world is only 6,000 parseos. There are further astronomical calculations, and there's some further discussion. New Mishnah. By the first Paschal offering, you may not own Chametz when it's offered, and you say the Hallel prayer as you eat it. By the second Paschal offering, you can have Chametz, and you don't say Hallel as you eat it. Both have the Hallel prayer said as they're prepared. They're both eaten roasted with Matzah and Marror, and both their obligations override the Shabbos. The Gemara cites some similar quotes in regards to these laws. The sources are discussed, and the points are qualified a bit further. New Mishnah. There's a list of certain different forms of impurity that can affect people that they can't eat from the Paschal offering, but if they do, they're exempt from kares liability, and some say they're even exempt if they enter the temple in this state of impurity. The Gemara discusses some sources for this ruling. There are some related points. New Mishnah. There's discussion on how the offering made by the Torah in Egypt before the actual Exodus differs from the regular Paschal offering that was offered later. By Egypt, it was on the 10th of Nisan. Its blood was sprinkled with bundles of hyssop on the lintel and doorpost, and was eaten in haste on one night. The other later Paschal offerings were observed all 7 days, which will be defined. The Gemara cites verses as sources and their derivation. It also says that when it said that it was observed all 7 days, that means that both that offering and the regular one could only be eaten on one night, but the one by Egypt had a Chametz prohibition for the whole day, while the regular one has this prohibition extended for 7 days. New Mishnah. There's a discussion on a case. If an animal was designated as a Paschal offering, but was then lost, a new animal was designated, and then the original was found. If it was found before the slaughter of the replacement, the original is left to graze until it develops a blemish, is sold, and is then used to purchase shlamim offerings, and the same applies to its substitute. If it was found after the replacement offering was slaughtered, it's just offered as a shlamim offering, and the same applies to its substitute. The Gemara qualifies many of these points. This is discussed further, along with a few related topics. There are some additional points in regards to this offering. New Mishnah. If you designate a female offering as your Paschal offering, or a male in its second year, that's not allowed for a Paschal offering. It has to be a yearling male, so it should be left to graze until it develops a blemish, sold, and then the funds should go to the donation chest for the shlamim offerings in the temple. If someone designates an animal for a Paschal offering and he dies, his son should instead bring it as a shlamim offering. The Gemara says based on this, that living animals can be permanently rejected from the altar. Rejection at the initial time of consecration is a valid rejection, and you can only properly reject an offering if it has monetary sanctity. There's also discussion as to when exactly the father in the case died. Some say it refers to the bringing of the Pesach Sheni offering. Some say the father died at noon. Some say he died after noon. And the opinion holds that living animals cannot be permanently rejected. There are a number of answers. New Mishnah. If the Paschal offering animal got mixed up with other offering animals, they all must be left to graze until they develop a blemish. The owner brings the value of the most expensive of them for both types, and the extra cost is forfeited. If it got mixed up with Bechar offering, some say if the group is only Kohanim who can eat such an offering, they can eat of the offerings. The Gemara discusses the opinion of the last case and says that some disagree and say that we should wait until they develop a blemish and bring an expensive animal of equivalent to the best and switch the Paschal offering consecration to that one, and then they're all eaten in accordance with the laws of a blemished Bechor offering. New Mishnah. If a group lost their Paschal offering, so they told one of the members to go find it and slaughter it, which he did, but in the meanwhile they brought and slaughtered their own offering, if the guy they sent slaughtered his first, they all eat of his, and if that group slaughtered theirs first, then they all eat of that one, and the guy that they sent eats of his. If they don't know which was slaughtered first, or they were slaughtered at the exact same time, the sent guy eats of his by himself, and the group's is burnt, but they're exempt from bringing another one. If the guy they sent said that if he delayed, they should go and slaughter one also for him, and they both went and slaughtered offerings, if the group was first, they all eat of it. If his was first, they each eat of their own. If they don't know, or they were at the exact same time, they eat of theirs, and his is burnt, and he's exempt from bringing a second offering. If he told them they should offer for him if he delays, and they told him that if he finds it, he should slaughter it for them, everyone eats from whichever animal was slaughtered first, and if you're not sure which that is, both are burnt. If neither was slaughtered for the other group, then they can just use their own offering. If two different groups of Paschal offerings got mixed up, each group just takes one offering, and they say to each other that if we picked our offering, then great. If not, then we're swapping registration. This applies with lots of groups too. If two individual offerings got mixed up, they each pick one, register a random additional person to be a part of their offering, and they say that they're swapping registration if necessary. They need the extra guy, so they're not leaving the offering completely ownerless mid-transfer. The Gemara qualifies some of the points in these cases. There's additional discussion on these, and it just figures out exactly what's going on with each of these unique situations. And that's the end of chapter 9. Chapter 10, and the final chapter of Tractate Pesachim, discusses some further laws of the holiday of Passover in regards to the actual laws and customs of the night of the holiday, in regards to aspects of the Seder, the Passover meal, and its related obligations. The first Mishnah says, on the eve of Passover, around the afternoon time of Mincha, you may not eat or drink until it gets dark. Every Jewish person, even the poorest man in Israel, must eat while reclining, as free men do. You drink 4 cups of wine, even if you're so poor that you require to be supported from the charity platter. The Gemara says it specifies this point about not eating until dark by Passover, even though it also applies by Shabbos and other holidays, to include the opinion that you actually can eat by those other times. It's specifically by Passover that you can't, as the matzah must be eaten with an appetite. Others say it's because there's slight variation in the timing by Passover as to when you have to stop eating. This is debated. This prohibition is against starting a meal during this period. Some say if you just continue your meal through this whole period, say by a Shabbos, and we say that when night falls, you then interrupt it by putting out a tablecloth, you say Kiddush, and then you resume eating. This is discussed. There's also argument if you said the Kiddush prayer, normally said over wine, at nightfall by the Shabbos meal in the synagogue. Some say you also need to say a blessing over the wine at home for your family, but you have fulfilled the Kiddush obligation. Others say you haven't even fulfilled the Kiddush obligation, and the reason it's said in the synagogue is for wayfarers who eat and sleep in the synagogue, and he holds that you have to say Kiddush where you eat. This is further discussed along with some related opinions. Some others do say it fulfills your Kiddush obligation and also covers for you making it at home, as he holds that a change of place does not require another blessing, but this is refuted based on a source. There are similar points qualified. There's also discussion in regards to the saying of the after blessings on this topic and some related points. This is discussed further. There's also debate about the sequence of the Havdalah prayer, which has a few blessings. In regards to the order of the blessing said, we say we follow the order of the wine blessing, the Kiddush blessing, the blessing on the flame, on the Havdalah service, and then Shehechianu last, if it's said. There's also discussion if we say the blessing over the fragrant spices before or after the flame. We say it's said before. There are related points in discussion on the order of these blessings. There are also points in the actual words of the Havdalah blessings which have been decided to be this. The exact precise text formatting is debated further. There's some additional discussion on the Kiddush and Havdalah prayers said by Shabbos. There are also points in regards to the timing. We show we cherish Shabbos by starting it early, by saying the Kiddush prayer on Friday night early, but we delay the Havdalah prayer on Shabbos night to delay the Shabbos' ending. There are some related points on this topic. There's further discussion on the blessings said by these ceremonies. Some say it's actually valid to say Kiddush over bread instead of wine. If you ate something prior to saying Kiddush or Havdalah, there's debate if you still say these prayers. We say you can still say the blessings, and if you didn't say the Kiddush prayer, you can say it at any time throughout Shabbos until Shabbos ends, and if you miss the Havdalah service, some versions say you can say it for the rest of the week, and some say you can say it only until and not including Sunday night. This is discussed. Some say you can say Kiddush over date beer, if that's the equivalent of wine in the region you're in, but some say we can't, and we also don't allow it by Havdalah. There are further points on these discussions. Okay, we said earlier we stop eating on the eve of Passover close to the afternoon mincha period, but there are 2 mincha periods, mincha gadola, noon, and mincha katana, about 3 p.m. So which is it referring to? It could be the earlier time where the Paschal offering is brought, as the concern could be if he's busy eating, he'll forget to bring the offering. Or it could be the later time, and the worry is that he'll be full that night and he won't eat the matzah properly. We bring a source that it's mincha katana and the second concern. Some say that during this period you can't eat proper foods, but you can dip and eat refreshments like vegetables. Some would drink wine all Passover Eve, so they'll be very hungry to eat the matzah. We bring the source that wine makes you hungry. Some would fast on Passover Eve, so that way they would want to eat the matzah. We then said we recline during the Passover meal, the Seder. This applies by the eating of the matzah, but not to the marror, the bitter herbs. There's debate by which cups of wine we lean by. Some say only by the first 2 cups, as the Haggadah, the collection of texts, quotes, and verses that's read at this Seder, the Passover meal, discusses the redemption from Egypt during the period where you drink those cups. Others say it's the last 2 cups you lean by, as it's celebrating the fact that we're free currently. It's ruled that we lean by all 4 cups of wine. The act of reclining does not mean lying on your back or leaning to your right side, as that's very dangerous, as the food could enter your windpipe if you're leaning like this and cause you to choke. So, we lean to the left. A woman in the presence of her husband is not required to recline unless she is a prominent woman. A son must recline in the presence of his father. There's debate if a Torah student needs to recline before his teachers. A waiter needs to recline. Women need to drink the 4 cups of wine too, as they were involved in the miracle of the exodus from Egypt. Wine from those days was typically diluted, so the amount you need to drink is the amount mixed typically to make a cup of wine by the after blessing. You can drink the wine without dilution. If you drink them all straight in a row, that's fine. If some of the cups were drunk by your household, that's fine. Some say if you drink the wine undiluted, you fulfill the obligation to drink the 4 cups of wine, but not the obligation to act in a manner of freedom. Also, if you drink all the cups in a row, you fulfill the obligation to drink wine, but not the obligation of the 4 cups. You can share with your household as long as you drink most of the cup. The exact amount necessary is discussed. Some say it's a revi'is, which was an old form of measurement, and it should be red wine. Some say men, women, and children are obligated to drink the 4 cups of wine, but instead of giving it to children, we give them grain and nuts as snacks throughout the day, so that way they don't go to sleep, and so that way they ask questions. Some would also take away their kids' matzah, so that way they wouldn't eat too much and fall asleep, and similar notions are related. It also talks about the importance of gladdening your household on a holiday, and further precise measurements of what a revi'is is. The exact measurements are pretty complex, and are described in regards to these concepts, like by a mikveh, an immersion pool, which must have 40 measurements and similar. It also says that there's no concern of drinking 4 cups of wine in regards to eating or drinking stuff in pairs, which shouldn't normally be done, as it makes you susceptible to demons and sorcerers. So, it says that the first night of Passover is a guarded night from any of such things. Others say that some of the cups technically combine, making 3 cups. Others say that it's considered 4 separate cups, as each is a mitzvah to itself. There are some further discussed points in regards to drinking cups or doing things in pairs or in even amounts, as a sage was told by a figure known as Yosef the demon that Ashmedai, the king of the demons, is appointed over all pairs, so it's dangerous to do things in pairs. Yosef the demon said that if you drink 2 cups intentionally or not, the demons can kill you. If it's 4, they won't kill you, but they'll only injure you, and only if it's intentional. If you accidentally consume something in pairs, you should hold your thumbs in either hand and say, "You and I are 3, and if a voice says, "You and I are 4, he should say, "You and I are 5, and if it responds that "You and I are 6, he should say, "You and I are 7, and someone once did this until they got to 101, and the demon burst. There are also some other quotes you should say listed here to ward off any sorceresses you meet, as told to a sage by the Madam of Sorceresses. It also says that demons will only harm you if you're particular about this whole pairs thing. If you just don't care, they won't bother you, but you should still be mindful. There are further points and qualifications on these concerns of pairs by such topics. It says the time a sorceress did sorcery on somebody, but they were careful to not eat things in pairs, so it had no effect. But once he got drunk and drank an even number of cups, so he was walking, and an Arab individual informed him that he was a dead person, and he touched a palm tree, which shriveled up, and he burst. Some say the concern of pairs does not apply to man-made foods, like cooked things, and not by a shop, not by a guest, not by a non-prominent woman, and similar points on this. There are also other things which expose you to harm of demons mentioned, relieving yourself between a palm tree and a wall if it's less than 4 cubits, as that's where demons pass and you're not giving them room. Passing between 2 palm trees if it's not a public thoroughfare, drinking borrowed water in a field if you are a minor, and passing over spilled water even if it was done by your wife, so long as there's no dirt spread on it, or if you didn't spit on it, and other qualifications. Some of these qualifications don't apply in a place where sorcery is common, as someone was riding a donkey and wearing shoes while passing over spilled water and his shoes shrank and his feet shriveled. There are also 3 things you shouldn't pass between: dogs, palm trees, and women. Some say pigs or snakes also. There are points on this, and it says that if two women are sitting by a fork in the road facing each other, they're doing sorcery, so you should use a different road. And if you can't, you should hold the hand of the person next to you, and if you can't, there's a quote you should say, mentioning a few demons by name so you won't be harmed. There are other concerns mentioned, like sleeping beneath the shade of a single palm tree in a courtyard or beneath the shade of the moon, and similar. There are a bunch of other shades and demons it talks about that are around certain trees and plants. It says the one by caper bushes has no eyes, so by that one, it's a viable strategy to just run away. Once it chased after somebody, tripped, grabbed a palm tree, and burst. It says sorb trees were filled with demons. There's the ketev demons, which appear by certain dates, and similar. There's also a few other negative practices mentioned. It says blindness is caused by combing your dry hair, and also drinking wine that drips from a barrel, and putting shoes on while your feet are wet, and also other improper practices which will make you poor, and many similar points. There are other concerns, drinking from water from rivers or ponds at night because of the demon shabriri of blindness, and quotes you can say to get rid of him, and many other points. There are a number of other of these and other harmful practices to be avoided in regards to health practices and similar. There are also other demons mentioned, Agras Bas Machlas, who goes forth by evenings with 18 myriads of angels of destruction which harm people, but they respected the sage Rabbi Hanina ben Dosa, who decreed to all demons that they should never pass through populated areas. There's a bunch more miscellaneous advice given for health stuff, business advice, and similar. There are other points saying God loves people who don't get angry, drunk, or insist on their due measure. There are three who God does not love: people who say one thing and mean something else, someone who won't testify for his friend, and someone who tries to testify against someone by himself without a second witness. These points are discussed further. There are other points. There are three things who hate each other: dogs, roosters, and a certain sect of Persians. Some add harlots, and some say the Torah scholars of Babylon who would frequently debate each other on just about everything. There are three who love each other: converts, slaves, and crows. There are four kinds of people who are intolerable: haughty paupers, rich people who deny valid financial claims against them, old people who commit adultery, and a communal leader who imposes himself on everybody for no reason. Some add somebody who remarries a wife he divorced twice. There are many other similar types of teachings brought. New Mishnah. By the first cup of wine, Beis Shammai says you first say the blessing on the sanctity of the day and then on the wine. Beis Hillel says you do the opposite. These opinions are discussed. It says we hold like Beis Hillel, even though obviously, as a heavenly voice said, we always follow Beis Hillel, as either this was ruled before that occurred, or this is like the opinion that says we just don't pay attention to heavenly voices in regards to resolving disputes. New Mishnah. After the first cup of wine, we take a vegetable, which is dipped prior to the later matzah and marror. Afterwards, you have the matzah, marror, bitter herbs, charesas, an apple, nut, and wine dip for the marror, and 2 cooked dishes. Dipping the marror in charesas is not a mitzvah, but others say it is. When the temple stood, they would then eat the Paschal offering. The Gemara discusses some of these points in regards to the intent necessary. Some say the cooked dishes could even be cooked beets and rice. Some say fish and an egg. Others say 2 meats, one to commemorate the Paschal offering and one to commemorate the Chagiga offering. Others say you can have a bone and its broth. It also goes through the blessing said on the karpas, the dipped vegetable, and the maror. There's some additional points on this. There's argument if you can eat the matzah and maror together, as the matzah is a biblical obligation while the maror is rabbinic. We say we eat the matzah separately with a blessing and the maror separately with a blessing, and then the two together as a sandwich of a sort in commemoration of the way it was eaten in the temple without a blessing, according to Hillel. There's also points on dipping food in general in regards to ritual purity. Some say that any food dipped in liquid requires you to wash your hands first. There are some additional points. We don't fully dip the maror into the charesas as we want it to remain bitter. There are some additional points in regards to washing before eating some of these foods. It's valid to swallow without chewing matzah, but not maror, as you have to taste the bitterness. If they're swallowed together, you've only fulfilled the matzah obligation. If they're wrapped in bast and swallowed, you've fulfilled neither. We say we put the matzah and maror and charesas before those reciting the Haggadah. We also remove the table so the children will ask questions. A kid once did this, asking why they're removing the table before they're eating, and the sage Rabbah said that you've exempted us from needing to say the Manishtana, the 4 questions asked by kids at the Passover Seder. Matzah is called lechem oni, bread of affliction, some say as we declare onion things on it. We bring verses as support. Charesas isn't a mitzvah, but it's put on the maror to nullify any potentially dangerous sap on the lettuce, which can make you sick. The ones who say it is a mitzvah, it's either eaten as commemoration of the apple trees that the Jewish women in Egypt gave birth beneath, or as the clay that the Jewish people used to build buildings in Egypt. So we fulfill both by using apples and making it thick, like clay. We bring proofs. New Mishnah. The second cup of wine is then poured, and the son asks questions. If he can't, the father teaches him to ask the Manishtana the 4 questions. Why is this night different from all other nights? On other nights we eat Chametz and Matzah, now we eat just Matzah. On all the other nights of the year, we eat any greens, now we're just eating Marror, bitter herbs. On all the other nights, we eat all types of cooked meats, now we eat just roasted meat. On all the other nights, we dip any vegetables once, now we do it twice. And the father answers by teaching him about the Exodus and the disgraceful start and the good end, and expounds on the verse, the Aramean sought to destroy my father. Nowadays, we swap the question about the type of meat to why we recline. Now, the Gemara says, if the son isn't smart enough to ask, his wife asks, and if she doesn't, he asks himself. Even if 2 Torah scholars who know all of these laws still ask each other. Some change the question to, on all the other nights we don't even dip our vegetables once, and now we dip twice. We say our disgraceful start, our ancestors were idol worshippers. Others say we were slaves to Pharaoh in Egypt. There are related points. New Mishnah. Rabbi Gamliel said, if you don't say about the Paschal offering, the Matzah and the Marror by this Seder, you have not fulfilled your obligation. The verses for this are cited. Also, in every generation, a person is obligated to view himself as if he personally left Egypt, as the verse says, and you shall tell your son on that day, saying, it is because of this that Hashem acted on my behalf when I left Egypt. Therefore, we are obligated to thank, praise, laud, glorify, exalt, honor, bless, extol, and acclaim God who did these miracles and brought us out of slavery to freedom. We say the Hallel prayer. There is argument as to how much, and after we say blessings about the redemption and Mashiach's coming, which are listed. The Gemara says we lift up the matzah and the maror when we mention them, but not the meat, so it doesn't look like we're eating consecrated meat outside the temple. There's debate if a blind person needs to say the Haggadah. The verses are discussed, and it argues over who wrote the Hallel prayer and discusses several praises from Tehillim and related verses. There's also points on the benefit of joy, and more discussion as to who wrote the Hallel prayer. There are a number of other blessings discussed. New Mishnah. The third cup of wine is then poured. He says an after blessing, and they then pour the fourth cup, and you say the Hallel prayer and the blessing of the song. You can drink between cups of wine, besides for in between the third and fourth cup. The Gemara rejects the implication from this that the after blessing by food requires a cup of wine, as this was instituted as a mitzvah. The blessing of the song is defined. There are a number of other verses discussed that are said, which are expounded on, and the saying of the Hallel prayer. It also says how when Nebuchadnezzar tossed Hananiah, Michael, and Azariah into a furnace, different specific angels argued which one of them should save him, and God told Gabriel to do it. These verses are debated along with expansion on a number of verses from the Hallel prayer. There are verses explained about the Exodus, how the great wealth of the Jewish people leaving Egypt was passed down people to people until the Romans got it. It also says that there were 3 fortunes hid by Yosef. One was given to Korach, one to Antoninus, Marcus Aurelius, a good friend of the sage Rabbi Yehuda Hanassi, and one is stored for the righteous when Mashiach comes. There are some further verses discussed. New Mishnah. You don't eat anything further after finishing the Seder meal with the Paschal offering and concluding with the Afikomen. The Gemara says some say this means that you don't join another group, others say it means you don't eat types of desserts. There's debate if the rule that you don't eat anything after the Afikomen, a specific piece of matzah that acts as a dessert, if it still applies. This is debated further along with support that there is still a biblical obligation to eat matzah on the first night of Passover. New Mishnah. If people while eating the Paschal offering fell asleep, they can continue eating when they wake up. If everybody in the group fell asleep, then they can't continue to eat when they awake. Some say that if they only dozed off, they can continue when they wake up, but not if they fell into a deep sleep. After midnight, the Paschal offering contaminates you with impurity, as does pigul, rejected offerings, or nosar, leftover offerings. The Gemara defines dozing and a deep sleep. The remaining points are qualified. This is discussed further. New Mishnah. If you say the blessing over the Paschal offering, you're exempt from saying the blessing of the Chagiga offering. This doesn't apply vice versa. Others say that neither exempts the other one. The Gemara explains that the basis for this dispute is if the throwing of the blood of the sacrifice on the walls of the altar is included in pouring the blood on the wall, but not vice versa. One sage, Rabbi Simlai, attended the redemption of a firstborn son and was asked based on a verse if the Kohen or the father of the son says the blessing. he says, and we rule, that the father of the son says both blessings. That's the end of chapter 10 and the end of Tractate Pesachim. Alright, that was a lot of information, so here's a rough summary of a lot of the practical takeaways from this tractate. You cannot own, eat, or benefit from chametz, leavened bread, on the holiday of Passover. On the night before the holiday of Passover, we customarily search our homes for chametz using a candle and verbally nullify any potentially remaining chametz you may have missed from your ownership. On the eve of Passover, any found chametz is burnt. We eat matzah and marror and the Paschal offering on the holiday of Passover. Matzah is unleavened bread, eaten to commemorate how the Jewish people left Egypt in such a hurry that their bread did not have time to rise. Marror is bitter herbs, usually horseradish, eaten to commemorate the bitterness of the slavery of the Jewish people in Egypt. When the temple stands in Jerusalem, there is an obligation to bring and eat the Korban Pesach, the Paschal offering. By the first night of the holiday of Passover, you have the Seder meal. The Seder is essentially an ordered ceremony consisting of drinking 4 cups of wine, several quotes, blessings, and verses, and similar, which are recited, and the included eating of the matzah and marror and several other customs that's done on the first night of Passover. And with that, that's about everything. Thank you so much for watching.